China's State Council released a white paper on Thursday to highlight the country's reform and opening up measures and global contributions since joining the World Trade Organization, or WTO, in 2001. The document, titled China and the World Trade Organization, is categorized into 4 parts, including China's fulfillment of its WTO commitments, China's attitude towards multilateral trading system, its contributions to the world, and its plan to continue opening up. And I have the document right here. Now, it comes at a time when global trade is facing a rise of unilateralism and protectionism. So welcome to this edition of The Point with me, Lu Xin, coming to you live from Beijing. And to talk about this white paper, we have Pascal Lamy, former Director General of the WTO from 2005 to 2013. And today's show is also being streamed live on CGTN's Facebook account. The handle is China Global TV Network. You are invited to, the viewers are invited to ask questions and leave comments for Mr. Lamy and the other guests who will be joining us later in the show. So grab your phone and join the conversation. By the way, the hashtag is reform and opening up. So many thanks to Mr. Lamy, and welcome to joining us on this edition of The Point from Brussels. I would start with a question from one of the netizens already, since we gave out the announcement yesterday, and we've already gotten some questions and over 400 thumbs up. And this question from a netizen by the name of Xingji, and it goes: what do you think will be the future relationship between China and the WTO? Will China be a game changer? Go ahead, please, Mr. Lamy.
Well, I think the answer to this question is in the hands of China and of the Chinese leadership. I think, contrary to other places on this planet, China has a choice between moving bilateral under the U.S. pressure and giving to the U.S. some sort of trade concessions in order to feed the dog and make sure that the U.S. stop barking, or China has the other option, which is to comfort the multilateral trading system, which, as you said, it joined in 2001, because overall it would be better for China to solidify, comfort, and reform the WTO rules-based system, because this would be good for China, but also good for the rest of the world. So my hope is that China, which has the option of moving either bilateral or multilateral, will choose the multilateral option, which, by the way, is what the European Union will do. I'm sure about that.
Well, we're going to talk about the possibility or the efforts to reform the WTO in just a moment. And one of the things that has been surrounding China's WTO activity or commitment has been whether China has fulfilled its WTO accession commitments over the past 17 years. For instance, according to the white paper, the average tariffs level was reduced by China from 15% in 2001 to 10% in 2010, and that level continues to go down. So, Mr. Lamy, how would you elaborate and evaluate on China's performance in meeting its WTO commitments so far?
Well, my own point, for what it's worth, is that China has abided by the commitments it took to join WTO, but China has done only that and not more, which now is starting to become a problem. So you often hear, including in other places of this planet, that China is very clever and that it's cheating with WTO rules. No, this is not my view. China is not cheating with the WTO rules. China is implementing the commitments it took when it joined. But this does not mean that, given the level of development of China now, which is many years after it joined, we can say that the multilateral rules-based system ensures a level playing field between China and other big players. So China abides by the rules, but the rules themselves are now not enough to discipline what many say as unfair trading practices by China, and notably subsidization of its economy, or the fact that China has not opened its public procurement market, which is the two examples which are most often cited when people explain why China should do more.
Are you seeing signs, and I believe the Chinese leadership have made announcement about what other opening up and reform measures China wants to take? From the signs that you have been seeing, including on the government procurement agreement, are you somewhat hopeful that China has realized the importance of continuing to open up and is dedicated to going further on that direction?
I think I'm very confident that China will keep opening its market, increasing market access. What was announced recently, for instance, on the reduction of tariffs on cars from 25% to 15% goes in the right direction. In goods, China will keep opening its market, and it's a good thing. In services, in my view, China should do more than what it has done. It would be good for the Chinese consumer to have a more competitive services sector, and bringing in foreign service producers would be good. Where I have my doubts is whether China, for instance, is ready to shrink its state-owned sector, which is roughly 40% of the economy today, and which is under command of the state with quite a lot of unfair trading comparative advantages, such as, for instance, subsidization. So this is the area where I think an effort should be made, and I can understand why within the Chinese leadership, those who want to keep the state-owned sector and those who want to shrink it may have a problem agreeing on the right direction.
At the same time, it seems that China hasn't received a fair credit for its trading efforts. As you have said, China has done its work as promised when it joined the World Trade Organization. Rather, China has received a lot of criticism among some skeptics. Last month, an opinion piece titled "China is Bringing Down the Global Trade Architecture" appeared in the Washington Post, saying China's industrial policy, such as Made in China 2025, quote, looks like history's biggest assault on the WTO. It continues to say that China's industrial ambitions have made the country a WTO outlaw. What is your opinion on this?
My opinion on this is that this is clearly excessive, this is polemic, this is not founded on facts, and by the way, if anybody in the WTO believes that China is not abiding by the commitments it took, there is a very simple solution to that, which is take China to the dispute settlement of the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization has a system that allows those who believe other countries do not behave as they should to go to a judge. There is a judge in the World Trade Organization. China was taken to this judge from time to time. It sometimes won its case, it sometimes lost its case. When China lost its case, and it happened, it implemented the decision of the judges in WTO. So this is an unfair criticism. Criticizing China for not abiding, there is a simple solution to that, which is go to dispute. Where there is a problem which is more complicated than that is, again, whether the rules of WTO should be modernized so that the level playing field is better. And this is not just about China. It's also, for instance, about agriculture. The WTO rules on agriculture today are biased in favor of developed countries against developing countries.
Right.
This is another area where the WTO system needs modernization and needs improvements.
Right. Well, just to remind our viewers once again, this is being live streamed on Facebook, and the handle is China Global TV Network, and the hashtag is China and WTO. So I have been talking to Pascal Lamy, former WTO Director General. You mentioned the dispute settlement mechanism. Let me give some additional statistics here on WTO's official website. China has been taken to WTO court, 41 times since joining the WTO in December 2001, while the US has been taken over twice that amount of times during the same period of time. What do these figures tell us about the trade practices of the two economies?
Well, the reason why US was taken more often than China is because of a very specific issue, which is anti-dumping. So the US are a big user of anti-dumping, which is a trade defense instrument you're allowed by WTO rules to enforce if you can prove that a foreign trader sells on your market below the normal price, and US is a higher user of anti-dumping than the rest of WTO members, which is why US has more disputes than others, including China, and by the way, also Europe, which is more, in terms of amount of cases, more on the Chinese side than on the US side.
Now, in April, China initiated a WTO dispute procedure against the US's 301 tariff investigation, calling it a violation of the WTO's fundamental principles, which is threaten others with unilateral action. But another term states its rule do not apply when there is a threat to national security, which is what the US claims. So we all know that WTO talks on rule changes are notoriously long, as the most recent round of talks began in Doha in 2001 and still haven't reached a conclusion. So in terms of making the WTO more relevant, more capable of resolving trade disputes, what is the way out?
No, I think WTO is in need of reform. The rule book of WTO needs to be adjusted to the new realities of today's international economy. The software of WTO rules today date from the 90s, when the WTO was created, which is 94. And again, this is an extremely long time ago, and we need to update the rule book, modernize a number of these rules, strengthen the rules on subsidies, for instance. And there is a sort of consensus which seems to appear between US, Japan, EU and China that this is the direction to go, but also, for instance, modernize the rule book on agriculture subsidies and on agriculture tariffs. So there needs to be a change in the way the rules are built and then implemented. Modernizing the WTO is probably the best way to comfort the multilateral trading system and to answer to the critique of those who say we have a WTO, but the playing field is not yet leveled enough. This is partially, at least, this is partially true.
And finally, 30 seconds if you can, when the biggest economy of the world is withdrawing from multilateralism, what do you advise the second biggest or the third biggest to do?
I'm advising the second and the third, which is China and Europe, to do what they did on Monday when Vice President Katainen met with Vice Premier Liu He, which is let's work together to modernize the WTO rule book. We know we will have concessions to make, but this is the price for keeping a multilateral trading system. And if the US want to go bilateral, let's tell them openly, precisely, clearly, we want to keep moving multilateral. This is something China and EU can do together, and I'm quite convinced that India, Africa, Brazil, Latin America will follow in this direction if China and EU show the way, which is, in my view, the right way.
Thank you very much, Pascal Lamy, former Director General of the World Trade Organization, for joining us from Brussels. And you have been watching a special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, which is being live streamed on Facebook. We'll take a very short break, and when we come back, I'll be looking at how China can continue to work with the WTO to try to calm trade tensions and stabilize the global economy. Stay with us. Well, this year marks the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up, and in its white paper released on Thursday about China's fulfillment of its WTO accession commitments, China's State Council said the country has substantially widened its market access for foreign investment and promoted balanced development of trade, adding China has been facilitating international trade over the past decades. As for China's global contributions after its WTO accession, efforts have been made to boost the world economic recovery and global investment. So how will China keep up with its reform pace amid unilateral threats from some countries, and how will China work together with the WTO to tackle escalating trade tensions and stabilize the global economy? Welcome back to The Point with me, Liu Xin, as our show is still being live streamed on Facebook, and please continue to leave comments and questions, and I will try to address them with the guests during the remainder of the show. And don't forget, our hashtag is China and WTO. And for the second half, I have economist Professor John Gong from the Beijing-based University of International Business and Economics, who's joining us from Paris, and David Mahon, Managing Director of Mahon China Investment Management Limited. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show. Let's first talk about China's investment issue in the United States, as that is making headline. Professor Gong, to you. Now, the White House earlier said the Trump administration would press ahead with restrictions on investment by Chinese companies in the tech industry, but President Trump said on Wednesday he would not impose new restrictions on Chinese investment and will rely on existing tools to guard against purchases and theft of U.S. innovations vital to the economy. What's your take of President Trump's apparent shift in tone?
I think he is facing some pressure from local governments, state governments. That's my guess. You know, these states are working actively with investors from China to set up ventures, to make investments in U.S. To create jobs and economic growth. And overall, the investment environment in the U.S. is still fairly competitive. I mean, if you look at the tax rates, you know, the utility cost structure, the land price, it's still very affordable. Just one example, you know, the largest auto glass company in China, Fuyao Auto Glass, made $600 million of investment in Youngstown, Ohio. This is the heart of the Rust Belt, you know, the place where Donald Trump said China trade destroy jobs. But on the contrary, it is one private Chinese company go into the heart of the Rust Belt, Youngstown, Ohio, to make a $600 million investment and create jobs, 3,000 jobs. So this is actually the business opportunities that Donald Trump doesn't want to give up.
Yeah, we don't really understand what is going on now. Mr. Mahon, the Wall Street Journal reported the U.S. Treasury is devising new policies to prevent firms where Chinese ownership is at least 25% from purchasing industrially significant technology. Is this fair concern on the part of the United States?
No, it's not. First of all, it's an act of economic self-harm, which all of this trade dispute in terms of having been initiated by the US is. But generally, this is a broader issue. To stop investment into technology, and actually America does need foreign investors in many sectors, it's a way of preventing China from developing technology itself. So it's part of a broader long-term plan that the US has had, which is to contain China. And this trade war, and even the phenomenon, as baleful as it is of Donald Trump, this is a very recent part of that whole process that goes back decades. So it has a deeper history than just Donald Trump's tenure as president.
The white paper on China and WTO also said China will streamline its two-way investment and regulate outward investment. Now, according to a report by Rhodium Group, an independent research provider, investment from China plunged by 90% during the first 5 months of this year. Professor Gong, is that normal? And is that, if normal, what the U.S. wants?
Well, I think we have to put this into context. I think the outward FDI happened in a very big way last year when we see that China's foreign exchange reserve is plummeting in a very big way. A lot of these investments have a lot to do with private business finding opportunities in real estate overseas, in golf courses, in hotels, properties, all these things. And it's also the time when the interest rate in China is relatively low. So I think that puts pressure on China's foreign exchange reserve and the current account balance. So I think that what the government is saying is that we would encourage those investments, not so much into those sectors, but into other areas that are more productive, that are conducive to elevating China's climbing the global value chain ladder. And there are also companies going outside of China to seek lower cost labor. For example, these labor-intensive industries are moving to places like Cambodia, Philippines, and Africa. So I think these are the foreign direct investments that the government can tolerate and encourage to some extent. But there are other investments that I don't think that our government were very enamored with.
Mr. Mahon, how do you read this 90% drop? What is the sentiment behind it? What is making this happen this way?
I think, as Professor Gong said, there's a capital restraint in place in China. There's an attempt at trying to discipline foreign investments more, that is, outgoing investments from China. And that's actually an aspect or a sort of derivative of the anti-corruption campaign, where there were a lot of false documents at the border. There was a lot of rorting or distortion of what was true foreign investment and international trade. I think this will change. The Chinese government will begin to release the sector more. I think the capital restraints will be somewhat relaxed. But it's all part of an overall attempt by Xi Jinping to discipline the economy more. But it's such a big economy, sometimes there is somewhat of an overreach in some areas, and I think that this is a result of that. But it won't endure.
Now, according to a report released by the International Labour Organization, effects of China on the quantity and quality of jobs in Latin America and the Caribbean, China created 1.8 million jobs in developing countries in Latin American and the Caribbean region from 1990 to 2016. It's just one example of China's contributions to the world's economy, but it never gets much talked about in the international media, Professor Gong.
No, well, this is actually not surprising to me because, Chinese investments mostly go to countries where American business are not likely to go. Places like Africa, places like, the Caribbean, places like, Southeast Asia. I mean, these are places where China has invested for a long time and worked for a long time, and and those places, I guess, are not on the radar screens of the major media in the U.S., I guess.
Well, I think it is also a very important rebuttal to the kind of argument that China has been the sole beneficiary of expanding world trade since it became the World Trade Organization member. Vice Minister of Commerce and spokesperson of the State Council, Wang Shouwen, had this to say during Thursday's press briefing. Let's take a listen.
Thanks to an open Chinese market, more American companies have launched and developed their businesses in China. In 2001, overall sales of American companies in the Chinese market were only 36 million yuan, roughly $5.4 million. By 2016, the number had risen to $600 billion. What does this mean for these U.S. companies? These are dividends the U.S. got from China.
So, Mr. Mahon, what is your comment on the kind of benefits China's expanding trade has meant to other WTO members?
Well, there's no question that China has become, since its ascension to the WTO, or rejoining, as they put it themselves at the time, the global trade regime. It's become one of the main engines of the global economy. And this idea that China's expansion has been taking from the West is a form of propaganda one that unfortunately most of the Western media has gone along with, because it just isn't so. The commonwealth that China has created for itself is phenomenal. But the commonwealth globally, because of globalization, and China being a major part of that globalization, has been huge. But it hasn't been such in the struggling commercial cultures of Western countries, Europe and the United States. They're struggling with their own systems. They're struggling with internal contradictions themselves. They're blaming China for that, and they're blaming globalization for that. But the net result of the last 30 years is that a lot of people have become wealthier. People are enjoying higher levels of employment. Overall, it's a very positive force, and China's a part of that.
Mm-hmm. The white paper also says China will continue to advance its opening up to a higher level, which has been reiterated by Chinese leaders on many occasions. Professor Gong, why would China want to do that to itself? And is it because of pressure from outside or pressure from within the development of China's own economy?
Well, first of all, we are the world's, actually we are the largest economy by PPP calculation. So, and also we are the largest nation. I mean, we can't export our way to prosperity. Being the largest trading nation in the world, we have to open up. I mean, if China's a small country, we can probably afford doing this, but we are the largest economy in the world, and we are playing an increasingly leadership role in the world trade governance system. So, China cannot afford keeping our borders closed to foreign investment, to trade. So this is something we have to do in the first place. Second, it's actually also in our advantage, in our own benefit to do this. Increasing competition by inviting foreign companies moving into China, opening up China's market to the world market, also creates a more competitive market, more competitive environment in China itself. Making Chinese companies more competitive. So it's actually, the benefits goes both ways. It's not like just China opening up and doing a favor to the world. I mean, trade generates gains fundamentally for both sides of the trade. So I think it's not just China benefiting from this, but also the world is also benefiting from a more open society in China and more open economy in China.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, as China goes further, there will be more opportunities for countries and for peoples around the world. We know last year, 130 million Chinese people, 130 million, yes, Chinese trips were made abroad with, tens of billions of US dollars spent. I'm just watching my Facebook account, and I see over 660 people have already given us a thumbs up, and over 89 comments made so far. I don't know whether we'll have enough time to address any of these comments, but yeah, I think the the comments have been relatively good, cool, and good morning.
Hi, Lucy. Let me tell you, Lucy, I just came back from Mauritius before I go into Paris, and I met a lot of people in Mauritius from China, and they told me that tourism from Chinese tourists in Mauritius is booming. And the airport is actually built by a Chinese company. So, I guess many people don't even know where Mauritius is. But this resonates exactly with what you just said. It's actually creating a lot of opportunities in many corners of the world.
Indeed. We should talk more about it. But anyway, we have to leave it there. So thank you so much, my two guests, John Gong from the Beijing-based University of International Business and Economics, and David Mahon, Managing Director of Mahon China Investment Management Limited. And you have been watching the special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin, also live streamed on Facebook. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope to see you again. We hope to do this again in the future. And follow us on Facebook and Twitter using the handle The Point with Alex. And go to YouTube and watch CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching. See you next time.